Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are looking at the first tiebreak game between Wesley So and Jan-Christoph Duda at the FIDE Grand Prix in Moscow. Now, in the previous game, Duda played the Dragon in a game which he only needed to draw. This backfired and he lost the game. Wesley played absolutely brilliant in that game. Now, this round will be decided in the tiebreaks. Will Duda be regretting his decision in the previous game? So without further ado, let's jump into this current game, which is tiebreak game number 1. Wesley had the white pieces. He opened the game with e4. Duda now played e5, knight to f3, knight c6. We have the Italian game with bishop c4, bishop c5, pawn to c3, knight to f6, pawn to d3, d6. So pretty normal stuff, both sides castle. Rook to e1, and now a5 from Duda, not a common continuation. So this line has been used by Ding Liren with some success. The idea is simple. Besides obviously giving the bishop a flight square on a7, black is basically just preventing further expansion on the queen side. So the more common a6 allows white the option of going b4, and after bishop a7, if bishop b6, then a4 continues to gain more space. So Duda played a5. The game continued knight b to d2, bishop to e6. Wesley decides to keep the tension in the position, bishop b5. And here a new move, which is knight to e7. So previously Wesley So has played a game against Ding Liren, which ended in a draw. That game was played in 2017. The game continued queen to b8 with an interesting idea of forming a queen-bishop battery with queen to a7. Now knight to e7 has the intention of later pushing c6 and d5, but not right away since e5 has to be first reinforced. So here we have d4 from Wesley, bishop back to a7. Now if white tries to win a pawn with d takes e5, after d takes e5, knight takes e5. Here black can play queen to d6. And after the knight retreats, knight to g4, using that power of the bishop on a7. And if after queen d6, knight d to f3, black can simply trade queens, play knight takes e4, regaining the pawn with an attack on f2. And black has no problems whatsoever in this position. So after the move bishop a7, Wesley played knight to f1, knight g6, so just reinforcing e5, and knight to g3. Now c6 from Duda, bishop back to d3, pawn to a4, pawn to h3, first controlling the g4 square before developing the bishop. Duda played b5, we have bishop b3, bishop b6. The bishop is no longer useful on this diagonal, so Duda just wants to reposition it. Queen d2 played, rook to e8, so just getting ready for this e file to open up. And this also vacates the f8 square for a piece. Could be a knight, could be a queen, as black might have some ideas of playing queen e7 just to give extra support to the c5 break. And if the knight attacks it, say knight to f5, then black always has the option of going queen back to f8. So now Wesley plays pawn to a3, just freeing up this rook to develop. Rook to b8. One of the ideas for black is to eventually push c5. So the rook comes to b8 just to give some extra protection to that b5 pawn. Bishop b3 is also possible, which would encourage the exchange of bishops, since the bishop is controlling that d1 square for the rook. But in the game, we see rook b8 from Duda, rook a to d1 played, bishop to c7, and now bishop c2 from Wesley, simply opening up this queen-rook battery, which could allow for some tactical possibilities in the future. Now in this position, Duda would love to go queen e7, supporting c5, but this runs into bishop g5, threatening to play knight h5 and attacking that pinned knight. If h6, then knight to f5, bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, knight to f8, bishop takes knight on f6, queen takes f6, we have d takes e5, d takes e5, bishop to e4. Well, this may not be losing, it's definitely much more comfortable to play with white, and white has some kingside pressure with moves like knight to h2 and knight to g4. So after bishop c2, Duda played the move h6, just preventing bishop g5. And now Wesley plays his knight into f5, which puts more pressure on h6, perhaps looking at a potential sacrifice. Now here the safe move is just to go knight to h7, and this gives black the option of going queen to f6 if necessary. For example, if bishop takes h6, g takes h6, queen takes h6. So queen g7 mate is being threatened. Bishop takes f5 is kind of risky since it opens up the position. So here you can play queen to f6. But after knight f5, Duda decides to play bishop takes f5. Wesley recaptured, and here knight to f8. And knight to f8 is unfortunately a mistake, which can be exploited. Better was to go knight to e7. And we shall return to this line later on. So after knight f8, d takes e5 was played by Wesley. In this position, Wesley could instead play the move bishop takes h6, and this is better. After g takes h6, d takes e5, just opening up the position for the nicely placed central rooks. And after d takes e5, queen takes h6, opening up an attack on the queen. And after queen e7, a very nice move here, knight to d4, threatening to capture on c6, which would fork the queen and rook, and this pawn is pinned. So the best here is knight 8 to h7, because if black tries to defend, say rook b6, then white goes rook to e3, threatening just to play rook to g3 check. And if pawn to e4, a very nice move again, f4. And once again this pawn is pinned, so en passant is impossible because of simply rook captures queen. And this attack is pretty devastating. Now let's go back to why knight e7 was a better defensive try. So here knight e7 instead of knight to f8. Bishop takes h6 is still a good choice for white, but it is a bit less effective. After g takes h6, the best is probably to play queen takes h6. And after knight e to d5, white is still to be preferred. He has ample compensation for the piece with moves like g4 and g5 coming. So after g takes h6, if d takes e5, d takes e5, queen takes h6, which opens up an attack on the queen. And previously the knight was on f8, but now with the knight on e7, black can block with knight e to d5. So in the game, let's go back, knight to f8, d takes e5, d takes e5. So here again, Wesley could play bishop captures h6. This was still possible. If queen takes d2, then bishop takes d2. White has an extra pawn with the two bishops. So if g takes h6, then queen takes h6 leads to the same line we have seen previously. But instead here after d takes e5, Wesley played queen captures queen. So Wesley did not manage to gain a decisive advantage. He still has the two bishops though. But the advantage isn't that significant. Rook b takes d8, pawn to c4, we have knight 8 to d7, pawn to g4, and rook to b8. So Duda managed to survive through a potentially difficult situation. And rook b8 is just a nice move which attempts to improve the position of that knight on d7. Now Wesley played c takes b5, simplifying the position, thinking that the game is heading towards a draw. So we have c takes b5 from Duda, king to g2, and now the knight comes to b6, preparing to reroute to c4, so the knight should be taken with bishop takes b6. Rook takes b6, now Duda is completely fine. The advantage of the two bishops is now gone. Wesley plays bishop to e4, we have bishop d6, rook to e2, king to f8. Now it's not clear how Wesley can further improve his position, so he just plays bishop back to c2. And now e4, so Duda tries to press on, but that pawn on e4 could potentially be weak. Perhaps not such a practical decision considering that Duda had little time on the clock. And this line definitely calls for accuracy. Black would be completely fine with a waiting move like bishop back to b8 or king g8. But instead we see e4, Wesley played his knight to d2, now attacking the pawn on e4 twice. Bishop e5 played, attacking b2, rook to b1, and now Duda played rook c6, which is an inaccuracy, dropping the pawn on e4. If Black had enough time, he would have found the move knight to d5. So threatening to play knight f4 check. If rook takes e4, then knight to f4 check, king f1, and here not capturing immediately, but first rook to c6, just tangling up white's pieces after bishop d1. So the rooks are disconnected and white doesn't have the option of playing his rook over to e1. And now you can capture on h3, and this position is about equal. But after rook to b1, Duda played rook c6. Wesley simply captured that pawn with his bishop. And now bishop d4. So bishop d4 puts that bishop in a pin. Bishop takes c6 will be met with rook takes e2. So Wesley played knight to f3. Knight f3 is a bit inaccurate. Instead, king f3 was maybe slightly better, just giving everything extra protection. So on knight to f3, Black could have played bishop back to b6. And after white unpins with bishop d3, rook takes e2, bishop e2, rook c2 with compensation for the pawn. But after knight f3, Duda played bishop takes f2, and this was a big mistake, being low on time. So Duda obviously overlooked So's reply. He was probably looking at maybe king takes or rook takes, where Black would continue with knight captures bishop. But here Wesley simply played bishop captures rook. Rook takes e2, bishop takes b5, and it's clear that Black is simply down a piece. Duda played rook to e3. If rook c2, then bishop d3 nets a piece. You could also play bishop takes a4. After rook e2, bishop d1. So in the game rook to e3, we have king takes f2, rook to b3, bishop takes a4, knight to e4 check, king to g2. The game continued on for a few moves, rook b8, bishop c2, knight d6, b4, and a piece and two connected passers is just too much. Duda played rook c8, bishop b3, rook to c3, and in this position, Jan-Christoph Duda resigned, as his position is simply hopeless. Pretty unfortunate ending for Duda. The next game was drawn, so Wesley So advances to round 2 of the FIDE Grand Prix in Moscow. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.